A police dog stopped an entire train station. What he sniffed out left thousands in shock. In a matter of moments, a routine day morphed into chaos and heroism. With every passing second, the tension in the air thickened, and lives hung in the balance. This is the gripping tale of Rex, a loyal police dog whose instincts uncovered a hidden threat that could have changed everything. Stay with us as we dive into this shocking story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. It was just another bustling morning at the city's main train station, one of the busiest transit hubs in the entire region. Thousands upon thousands of commuters flooded through the grand halls, each one caught up in their own world. Some were checking their watches frantically, worried about missing their trains. Others were scrolling mindlessly on their phones, earbuds plugged in, completely disconnected from their surroundings. Business people in sharp suits hurried past families with excited children. Tourists with oversized backpacks fumbled with their tickets, and elderly passengers moved slowly but deliberately toward their destinations. The sound of rolling luggage wheels clattered against the polished marble floors in a never-ending rhythm. Announcements blared overhead in multiple languages, echoing through the cavernous space. The distant roar of arriving and departing trains rumbled beneath the station, a constant reminder of the constant flow of humanity passing through this massive transportation hub. It seemed like any other ordinary day, predictable, routine, and completely unremarkable. But among the endless sea of faces and bodies was Officer Johnson and his faithful partner, Rex, a magnificent German shepherd with piercing amber eyes and an unmatched sense of smell that had been honed through years of rigorous training. Rex wasn't just any dog. He was a highly decorated police dog, renowned throughout the department for his incredible instincts, his unwavering loyalty, and his remarkable ability to detect threats that others couldn't even fathom. Together, they patrolled the station with clear purpose and determination, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd, reading body language, assessing every movement. Officer Johnson's hand rested gently on Rex's leash, a connection forged through countless hours of training and trust. They moved through the station like seasoned professionals, aware that danger could emerge from anywhere at any moment. Then, something shifted. Something changed in the air. Rex's ears suddenly perked up, standing at full attention. His entire body went rigid, muscles tensing as if he'd been struck by lightning. The officer felt it too, a palpable change in the atmosphere, a tension that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the station. Rex began to sniff the ground intensely, his powerful nose working overtime, processing scents that human senses couldn't even begin to comprehend. The dog pulled his handler forward with unmistakable urgency, his movements deliberate and focused. This wasn't a false alarm. Officer Johnson had worked with Rex for nearly a decade, and he knew that look intimately. That expression meant only one thing. Something dangerous was nearby. Something that required immediate attention. The crowd continued on around them, oblivious and unaware that danger lurked just beneath the surface of their everyday commute. Mothers pushed strollers, students chatted with friends, workers rushed to catch their trains. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. But for Officer Johnson and Rex, there was no turning back. They were about to stumble upon something that would shake the entire station to its core and change the course of this ordinary morning forever. The tension was building. The stakes were rising. And this was just the beginning of an extraordinary series of events that would leave thousands in shock. Rex's nose led Officer Johnson deeper into the heart of the station, weaving through the dense crowd with single-minded determination and unwavering focus. The dog's breathing quickened noticeably, his entire body language shifting as his focus narrowed to a laser-sharp point that excluded everything else around him. Something specific had caught his attention, a scent that sent alarm bells ringing through his highly trained senses with an intensity that couldn't be ignored. Officer Johnson's heart began to race in anticipation, adrenaline coursing through his veins like electricity as he followed his partner's lead, trusting in the years of training and partnership they had built together. They moved past the busy ticket counters, where agents processed endless streams of passengers, past the information booth where confused travelers asked directions, past the endless rows of metal benches where tired and weary travelers waited for their trains to arrive. Rex didn't slow down for a single moment. If anything, his pace quickened with each passing second, his urgency becoming more pronounced and more unmistakable with every step they took. The officer could feel the tension mounting steadily, building with each passing second like pressure in a sealed chamber. Whatever Rex had detected, it was close, dangerously close, uncomfortably close. The dog's behavior had changed dramatically from his normal patrol demeanor. His tail was rigid, his muscles tensed, his breathing shallow and focused. Officer Johnson had seen this before, many times throughout his career, and he knew exactly what it meant. Rex had locked onto something significant, something that posed a genuine threat. The connection between handler and dog was so strong that Officer Johnson could practically read Rex's mind, could sense the urgency coursing through the animal's veins. Then, Rex came to an abrupt halt near a seating area in the main concourse of the station. His nose twitched with intense, almost frantic focus, and he stared directly at a worn, nondescript backpack sitting innocuously on one of the cold metal benches. The bag was gray and weathered, showing signs of age and heavy use. To any casual observer passing by, it looked like nothing more than forgotten luggage, just another piece of equipment left behind by a careless or forgetful traveler in the chaos of the station. But to Rex, with his extraordinary sense of smell and his years of training in detecting contraband and explosives, it was screaming with danger. The dog's ears remained alert and upright, his eyes fixed unwaveringly on the backpack, his body language communicating a clear and unmistakable message. Something was terribly, dangerously wrong. Officer Johnson's heart pounded in his chest like a jackhammer as he cautiously approached the bench, his every movement deliberate and calculated. His hand instinctively moved toward his radio, ready to call for backup at a moment's notice. He looked around carefully, assessing the immediate situation with a trained eye. There were still hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of people in the immediate vicinity, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Families with children, elderly passengers, business people, tourists, all of them going about their day, oblivious to the potential danger mere feet away. He needed to act carefully, methodically, with precision, without causing panic or alarm that could lead to a stampede or mass confusion. With deliberate, measured movements, Officer Johnson reached for the backpack. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it carefully, feeling its weight with growing concern. It was heavier than it should have been, far heavier than a normal traveler's bag would be. The weight distribution was all wrong, unbalanced in a way that suggested something substantial and concerning was packed inside. With a swift, practiced motion honed through years of police training, he unzipped it slowly, his senses on high alert, prepared for anything. And the world seemed to freeze in that single, eternal moment. What lay within was nothing short of horrifying and absolutely shocking. Bundles upon bundles of cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars in neatly wrapped stacks, packages of white powder that could only be one thing: drugs. massive quantities of narcotics that represented a fortune in the criminal underworld. And worst of all, a loaded handgun, its dark metal gleaming ominously in the harsh fluorescent station lights, fully loaded and ready to use. Officer Johnson's breath caught in his throat, his mind reeling at the implications. But there was more. So much more. Beneath the contraband, carefully concealed, he found a note. His hands shook visibly as he carefully extracted it, his eyes scanning the hastily scrawled words written in an aggressive, jagged handwriting. The message was chilling and disturbing, filled with cryptic references to a larger criminal operation, to other locations throughout the city, to a network of dangerous criminals with sinister intentions and far-reaching plans. There were names, addresses, dates, and instructions that suggested this was part of something much bigger. A coordinated effort involving multiple players and multiple locations. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of him. Disaster had been narrowly averted by mere minutes, perhaps even seconds. If Rex hadn't detected this bag, if they had passed by just moments earlier, if the dog's instincts had been even slightly off, if they had taken a different route through the station, the consequences would have been absolutely unimaginable. A bomb could have detonated. A criminal transaction could have taken place. Lives could have been lost in an instant. Officer Johnson's breath came in short, rapid gasps as the magnitude of the situation washed over him like a tidal wave. Rex had just saved countless lives. Thousands of unsuspecting passengers were blissfully unaware of how close they had come to tragedy and disaster. A mother with her young child sitting just 20 feet away on a nearby bench. A group of excited teenagers laughing and joking with each other, completely oblivious. An elderly couple holding hands as they waited patiently for their train, their golden years suddenly precious and fragile. A businessman on an important call, a student studying for exams, a traveler on the journey of a lifetime. All of them had been in danger, and none of them knew it. None of them would ever know how close they had come to catastrophe. Officer Johnson's hands moved with urgency as he immediately called for backup on his radio, his voice steady and professional despite the chaos of emotions raging inside him. His training kicked in, overriding his shock and disbelief. Within moments, what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, the station began to transform before everyone's eyes. Police officers appeared from every direction, emerging from break rooms and patrol routes, cordoning off the area with yellow caution tape, evacuating nearby passengers with calm but firm authority. The peaceful, ordinary morning had shattered into 1,000 pieces, replaced by the controlled chaos of a major police operation. But as Officer Johnson stood there, looking at the contents of that backpack with growing dread, he couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was only the tip of the iceberg. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known in that moment, was that this discovery was only the beginning of something far more sinister, far more dangerous, far more complex than he could have possibly imagined. There were layers upon layers to this case, connections that reached far beyond this single backpack, implications that would take weeks to unravel. The real investigation was just beginning, and Officer Johnson and Rex were about to be pulled into the center of a conspiracy that would test their skills, their courage, and their bond like never before. The station had transformed into a controlled war zone of investigative activity and organized chaos. Yellow caution tape cordoned off the entire seating area where the backpack had been discovered, creating a perimeter that kept curious onlookers at a safe distance. The tape fluttered slightly in the air currents generated by the station's climate control system, a visual barrier between the investigation and the general public. Officers in dark uniforms moved with purpose and precision, their movements deliberate and calculated, documenting every detail with meticulous attention to accuracy, photographing the scene from multiple angles and perspectives, collecting evidence with the utmost care and professionalism. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to shine even brighter than before, casting harsh shadows across the polished marble floors as the investigation unfolded with military-like efficiency and coordination. Forensic photographers snapped hundreds of photographs, capturing the backpack from every conceivable angle, documenting its exact position on the bench, the surrounding area, and any potential trace evidence. Evidence technicians in white latex gloves carefully examined the bench and the surrounding area, searching for fingerprints, fibers, or any other material that might provide crucial clues about who had placed the backpack and when. The air itself seemed charged with tension and anticipation, filled with the quiet urgency of professionals engaged in serious work. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the scene within 20 minutes of Officer Johnson's initial call, her unmarked sedan pulling up to the station entrance with practiced efficiency. She was a seasoned investigator with over 15 years of experience in the narcotics and organized crime divisions, a veteran of countless investigations that had taken her into the darkest corners of criminal enterprise. Her sharp eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses that gave her an intellectual appearance, took in the scene immediately upon arrival, cataloging details that others might have missed or overlooked. She was known throughout the department for her legendary ability to connect seemingly unrelated pieces of information into a coherent and comprehensive picture, for her relentless and tireless pursuit of the truth, and for her unwavering commitment to justice and the rule of law. Her reputation preceded her. Criminals feared her, colleagues respected her, and supervisors trusted her implicitly. As she approached Officer Johnson, who was still standing near the evidence table where the backpack's contents had been carefully arranged and labeled, she could see the relief and exhaustion written across his weathered face like an open book. She could sense the emotional toll that the discovery had taken on him, the weight of responsibility that came with uncovering something so significant and so dangerous. "Good work, Johnson," she said, her voice calm, measured, and reassuring. "You and Rex may have just prevented something catastrophic from happening. You may have saved hundreds or even thousands of lives today. Tell me everything, every detail, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem to you. The smallest detail could be the key that unlocks this entire case." Officer Johnson recounted the events of the morning with precision and clarity, describing Rex's behavior in meticulous detail, the exact location of the backpack on the bench, the contents they had discovered and cataloged, and the cryptic note that had been found carefully concealed beneath the contraband. He spoke about the weight of the bag, the way Rex had reacted, the urgency in the dog's movements, every observation that might prove relevant to the investigation. Detective Chen listened intently, her mind already working through the implications, already beginning to formulate theories about who might be behind this operation and what their ultimate goals and objectives might be. As Johnson spoke, forensic specialists and protective equipment carefully bagged and labeled each piece of evidence with meticulous attention to the chain of custody. The cash was methodically counted and recorded, $247,000 in total, mostly in crisp $100 bills arranged in neat bundles, suggesting careful preparation and organization. The white powder was carefully packaged in evidence bags for laboratory analysis, though Detective Chen had little doubt about what it would turn out to be: cocaine, heroin, or some other controlled substance worth a fortune on the street. The handgun was a 90mm semi-automatic pistol, the serial number already being run through the FBI's database to determine its history, ownership, and whether it had been used in any previous crimes. but it was the note that held Detective Chen's complete and undivided attention. She studied it carefully, her eyes scanning each word, each phrase, each nuance of meaning. The message was written in a hurried scrawl, the letters jagged and aggressive, but the words were unmistakably clear and purposeful. Package for Marcus. Delivery at Terminal B, 2 p.m. If compromised, activate Protocol 7. The network depends on this. V. Detective Chen's eyes narrowed as she read the words, her mind immediately beginning to process the implications. Protocol 7, Terminal B, a network. These weren't random criminals operating independently and haphazardly. This was organized, coordinated, professional, part of something much larger and far more dangerous than a simple drug transaction. Marcus was likely a key player in whatever operation was taking place, someone with significant authority and responsibility. And whoever V was, whoever had written the note, held significant authority within this criminal organization, enough authority to make decisions and give orders. We need to lock down Terminal B immediately, Detective Chen said, her voice taking on a commanding tone that brooked no argument. Get officers to every entrance and exit. I want complete surveillance of all access points. I want surveillance footage from the past 48 hours, every camera, every angle. I want to know who placed this backpack, exactly when they placed it, what vehicle they arrived in, where they parked, everything. I want facial recognition run on every person who accessed that terminal in the past 72 hours. And I want to know who Marcus is. Run that name through every database we have access to. Check criminal records, financial records, property records, everything. Officers scattered to carry out her orders with military precision, moving with urgency and purpose throughout the station. The investigation was expanding rapidly, growing exponentially from a simple discovery into something far more complex and far-reaching in scope. What had started as a routine patrol had evolved into a major criminal investigation that would likely consume weeks or months of investigative resources. Detective Chen turned back to Officer Johnson, her expression serious and thoughtful, her mind clearly working through multiple scenarios and possibilities. This note mentions Protocol 7, she said, her voice low and intense, meant for Johnson's ears alone. That suggests there's a predetermined response to situations like this. Contingency plans that have been established in advance for emergencies or compromised operations. If someone in this organization realizes that this package has been discovered and intercepted, they might activate whatever Protocol 7 entails. That could mean anything: destroying evidence at other locations, fleeing the jurisdiction entirely, eliminating potential witnesses or informants, or taking direct action against law enforcement. These organizations don't tolerate failure, and they certainly don't tolerate interference from police. Officer Johnson felt a chill run down his spine, a wave of cold dread washing over him. He hadn't considered that possibility in his initial shock and relief at the discovery, but now that Detective Chen had mentioned it, the implications were crystal clear and absolutely terrifying. This discovery might have just put people in danger, not just himself and Rex, but potentially other officers, other witnesses, and possibly even innocent bystanders who might be caught in the crossfire. "What do you want me to do?" Officer Johnson asked, his voice steady and professional despite the concerns weighing heavily on his mind. "Stay alert," Detective Chen replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "You and Rex are heroes today, but you might also be targets. These organizations don't forget people who interfere with their operations. They don't forgive interference, and they certainly don't let it go unpunished. I'm going to assign protective detail to you and your family. We don't know how far this network extends, how many resources they have at their disposal, or how much they know about what happened here and your role in it. I'm not taking any chances with your safety. Over the next several hours, the investigation expanded exponentially in scope and complexity. Detectives fanned out across the city in coordinated teams, following leads, interviewing witnesses who had been in the station at the time of the discovery, cross-referencing names and locations against known criminal databases. The name Marcus appeared in several databases and law enforcement systems. Marcus Delgado, a known associate of several organized crime syndicates operating in the region. A man with a lengthy history of violence and illegal activity stretching back over 2 decades. He was currently believed to be operating out of a warehouse district on the east side of the city, though his exact location remained unknown and elusive. The surveillance footage from the station revealed crucial information that would prove invaluable to the investigation. A man in a dark hoodie and dark sunglasses had placed the backpack on the bench approximately 40 minutes before Officer Johnson and Rex discovered it. He was caught on multiple cameras throughout the station, his movements captured from various angles and perspectives. But his face remained obscured, hidden behind the disguise he had carefully constructed. However, the way he moved, the economical nature of his gestures, the way he carried himself with complete confidence and authority, suggested military training or extensive combat experience. This wasn't an amateur criminal operating out of desperation. This was a professional, someone trained and experienced in covert operations. By late afternoon, Detective Chen had assembled a comprehensive task force dedicated entirely to this case. Narcotics officers with years of experience in drug investigations, organized crime specialists familiar with the major criminal syndicates, federal agents from the ATF and FBI with access to resources and databases that local police lacked. All of them were now working together, pooling their collective resources and expertise to unravel this mystery and follow the investigation wherever it might lead. The backpack discovery had opened a door into a world of criminal activity that was far more extensive and far more dangerous than anyone had initially suspected. The initial assessment of a simple drug transaction had evolved into something much more complex. Evidence of a coordinated criminal network, of planning and organization, of resources and reach that suggested major players in the organized crime world. But as the investigation deepened, as more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, as connections were made and patterns emerged, Detective Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial, something important, something fundamental, something that would change everything about how they understood this case and the criminal organization behind it. The note had mentioned a network, a coordinated operation with multiple players and multiple locations, suggesting a level of organization and sophistication that went far beyond simple drug dealing. If that assessment was correct, then this backpack was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. And there were likely other operations in progress, other packages being prepared for delivery, other plans in motion. The implications were staggering, the potential scope of the criminal enterprise almost overwhelming to contemplate. As the sun began to set over the city, casting long, dramatic shadows across the train station's interior, painting everything in shades of orange and gold, Officer Johnson stood with Rex, watching the investigation unfold with quiet intensity. The dog rested his head against his handler's leg, clearly exhausted from the emotional and physical intensity of the day. But his eyes remained alert and watchful, his instincts still active, still sensing something in the air that suggested this was far from over. Rex seemed to understand, on some instinctual level, that their role in this drama was far from concluded. The calm before the storm had passed, dissipated like morning mist under the heat of the sun. Now, the real storm was beginning to gather on the horizon, dark clouds forming and building with ominous intensity, and no one could predict where it would strike next or how devastating it would ultimately prove to be. The investigation had only just begun, and already it was clear that this case would test everyone involved. Their skills, their courage, their commitment to justice, in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The federal building downtown had become the nerve center of the investigation, a bustling hub of intense activity where multiple law enforcement agencies worked in unprecedented coordination and cooperation. The task force had commandeered an entire floor of the building, setting up a war room that resembled something out of a high-stakes spy thriller or intelligence operation. Wall-to-wall whiteboards displayed photographs of suspects, names of known associates, addresses of significant locations, and complex connections drawn in red and blue markers, creating a visual map of the criminal network. Computer terminals lined long tables arranged in strategic positions, their screens glowing with databases, surveillance footage, financial records, and communication intercepts. The air was thick with the pungent aroma of strong coffee fumes and the electric tension that only a major investigation in full swing could generate. The energy in the room was palpable, almost tangible, a sense that something significant was unfolding and that everyone present was part of something larger than themselves. Detectives and agents moved between stations with purposeful efficiency, their faces showing the strain of working around the clock, their eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. Some were on phones, conducting interviews and following leads. Others were hunched over computers, analyzing data and cross-referencing information. Still others were engaged in intense discussions, debating theories, and sharing insights about the criminal organization they were pursuing. The controlled chaos of a major investigation in progress filled every corner of the war room. Detective Sarah Chen stood at the center of it all, orchestrating the investigation with the precision and skill of a conductor, leading a complex symphony. She had barely slept in the past 36 hours, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, her determination and unwavering focus driving the entire operation forward with relentless intensity. Her eyes were tired but sharp, her mind still working at peak efficiency despite the physical exhaustion. Around her, agents and detectives worked frantically, each pursuing different angles of the investigation, each contributing their specialized expertise and unique perspective to the larger picture that was slowly emerging from the chaos of data and information. "We've got something significant," announced Agent Marcus Rodriguez from the FBI. A tall man with sharp, angular features and intense dark eyes that missed nothing. He was hunched over a computer terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced speed as he pulled up financial records and transaction histories. "The cash in that backpack, $247,000 exactly, matches a pattern we've been tracking and analyzing for months, possibly even longer. Large deposits and withdrawals, always conducted in cash, always carefully structured to remain below with a federal reporting threshold of 247,000 exactly, matches a pattern we've been tracking and analyzing for months, possibly even longer. Large deposits and withdrawals, always conducted in cash, always carefully structured to remain below the federal reporting threshold of 247,000. Exactly matches a pattern we've been tracking and analyzing for months, possibly even longer. Large deposits and withdrawals, always conducted in cash, always carefully structured to remain below with a federal reporting threshold of 10,000. It's called structuring, and it's a classic money laundering technique used by sophisticated criminal organizations to hide the true source and destination of illegal funds." Detective Chen leaned over his shoulder, studying the data with keen and focused interest. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for, once you understood the mechanics of financial crime. Multiple bank accounts scattered across different institutions, multiple individuals acting as fronts and intermediaries, all connected through a complex web of shell companies and dummy corporations designed to obscure ownership and control. The money moved through the system like water flowing through a complex network of pipes, constantly shifting direction, constantly changing hands, but always moving toward the same ultimate destination: the heart of the criminal enterprise. Where does it all end up? Chen asked, her voice sharp and focused, cutting through the ambient noise of the war room. Follow the money, Marcus. That's always where the real answers are. That's the interesting part, Rodriguez replied, clicking through several screens with methodical precision. The data displayed on the monitor showed a complex web of transactions and transfers, each one carefully documented and analyzed. We traced the money back through 7 different shell companies across 3 different states, moving through multiple financial institutions and intermediaries, and it all converges at one location: a real estate development company called Nexus Holdings, based in this city, but with operations and properties across the entire region. They claim to be involved in legitimate real estate development, property management, and construction. But the financial patterns suggest something far more sinister, operating beneath the surface. Chen's eyes widened slightly, her mind immediately grasping the significance of the discovery. Nexus Holdings. The name meant nothing to her initially, but she could feel the weight and importance of the discovery radiating through the room like a shockwave. This was the kind of lead that could break an entire case wide open, the kind of connection that could expose the full extent of the criminal organization and its operations. This was the thread that, when pulled, might unravel the entire tapestry of criminal enterprise. "Pull everything you can find on Nexus Holdings," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Corporate filings with the state, property records and deed transfers, employee lists and organizational charts, financial statements and tax returns, bank records, everything. I want to know every detail about this company. And get me the names of the board members and major shareholders. I want to know who's running this operation, who's making the decisions, and who's profiting from the criminal enterprise. Cross-reference the names against known organized crime figures, against criminal databases, against everything we have access to." Across the room, Detective James Martinez was working on a completely different angle of the investigation, focusing on the physical evidence from the station. He had been methodically analyzing the surveillance footage from the train station, examining it frame by frame with painstaking attention to detail, studying the man in the dark hoodie who had placed the backpack on the bench, using advanced facial recognition software and sophisticated gait analysis technology, computer programs that could identify individuals based on the unique way they walked and moved. He had managed to identify several potential matches in law enforcement databases. "I've got a possible ID on our suspect," Martinez called out, his voice carrying across the war room with unmistakable excitement and urgency. "The gait analysis suggests this could be Viktor Petrov, a former Russian military operative who disappeared from official records about 5 years ago. He's got an extensive background in organized crime, weapons trafficking, contract killing, and covert operations. If this is him, we're dealing with someone at a very high level of the criminal hierarchy. Someone with serious skills, serious experience, and serious connections." The room fell silent for a moment as the implications of this identification sank in, as everyone present understood what it meant to be dealing with a professional operative of this caliber. A professional killer, someone with military training and advanced combat experience, someone who had been operating in the shadows for years, moving through the criminal underworld without being caught or identified. This wasn't a street-level criminal or a mid-level dealer motivated by greed. This was someone with serious skills, serious training, and serious connections to powerful criminal organizations. Detective Chen's jaw tightened visibly, her expression hardening as she processed this new information. The case had just become exponentially more dangerous. "Get his complete file," she said, her voice cold and focused. "I want to know everything about Petrov. His known associates and criminal contacts, his previous operations and their outcomes, his methods and preferred tactics, his known locations and safe houses, everything. Cross-reference his known associates with the names we've already identified in this investigation. And get this information to Protective Services immediately. If Petrov is involved in this operation, then Officer Johnson and his entire family are in serious danger. We need to increase security and move them to a more secure location." Meanwhile, in a different section of the war room, ATF agent Lisa Thompson was making significant progress on the weapons angle of the investigation. The 9mm handgun found in the backpack had been traced through its serial number using federal weapons databases, and the results were both informative and deeply disturbing, revealing a history of violence and criminal activity. The gun was originally registered to a weapons dealer in Miami, who was killed in a drive-by shooting 3 years ago, Thompson explained, pulling up the detailed information on her screen for everyone to see. After the dealer's death, the weapon disappeared from police evidence custody. No one knows how it went missing or who was responsible for removing it from the evidence facility, but it's been used in at least 2 armed robberies and 1 aggravated assault since then, based on ballistics analysis and crime scene evidence. This is a gun that's been passed through multiple hands in the criminal underworld, used as a tool in various crimes, which suggests it's been deliberately kept in circulation by this organization, Chen said, thinking aloud, her mind working through the implications. They're not just dealing drugs and moving money through the financial system. They're actively involved in violent crime. This is a full-service criminal enterprise, offering everything from drug distribution to weapons trafficking to contract violence. They're organized, they're professional, and they're clearly very profitable. By evening, after hours of intensive investigation and analysis, the pieces were beginning to come together, forming a picture that was far more complex and far more dangerous than anyone had initially imagined or anticipated. Nexus Holdings appeared to be a legitimate real estate development company on the surface, presenting itself to the world as a respectable business engaged in property development and management. But beneath that carefully constructed veneer was something far more sinister and far more criminal. The company owned properties throughout the city, warehouses in industrial areas, office buildings in downtown locations, residential complexes in various neighborhoods. Some of these properties showed unusual patterns of activity that suggested they might be serving purposes far different from their ostensible functions. One property in particular caught everyone's attention and became the focus of intense scrutiny. A large warehouse in the industrial district on the east side of the city, ostensibly used for storing construction materials and equipment for development projects. But the financial records showed that the warehouse was generating far more revenue than it should have been for a simple storage facility. The property was showing income streams that didn't match legitimate storage operations. Additionally, surveillance of the property conducted over several days revealed suspicious activity. Vehicles arriving at odd hours of the night, individuals entering and exiting through unmarked doors at the rear of the facility, security measures that seemed excessive and overly sophisticated for a legitimate business operation. That warehouse could be a distribution center for drugs, Detective Chen said, studying the property records and surveillance photos with intense concentration. Or it could be a manufacturing facility where they're producing synthetic drugs or processing narcotics. If they're producing synthetic drugs on a large scale, that would explain the volume of money moving through the financial system. We need a warrant to search that location and determine what's actually happening inside. I'm already working on it, said Assistant District Attorney Michael Wong, who had been brought in to coordinate the legal aspects of the investigation and ensure all evidence was properly obtained and documented. I've got enough probable cause based on the financial records, the surveillance evidence, and the connection to known criminals to get a warrant within the hour. But we need to be extremely careful about how we approach this situation. If the organization realizes we're closing in on them, they might destroy evidence, they might eliminate witnesses, or they might flee the jurisdiction entirely, taking their operation with them. Detective Chen nodded grimly, understanding the delicate balance between moving quickly and moving carefully. We'll need to coordinate with federal agencies. This is bigger than local police can handle alone. We need FBI tactical teams with specialized training in high-risk operations, DEA agents with expertise in drug manufacturing and distribution, ATF specialists with knowledge of weapons trafficking, and federal prosecutors who can handle the complex legal aspects. Everyone. And we need to move fast before they realize we're onto them and take action to protect their operation. As the evening wore on and darkness settled over the city, more information continued to pour in from various sources, each piece adding to the growing picture of criminal enterprise. Phone records obtained through court-authorized wiretaps showed that Marcus Delgado, the man mentioned in the cryptic note, had received multiple calls from a number that traced back to an office in the Nexus Holdings building downtown. Financial records showed that Delgado had received over $500,000 in payments from shell companies connected to Nexus Holdings over the past year. Payments that appeared to be compensation for services rendered. And criminal records revealed that Delgado had been arrested multiple times for drug trafficking, weapons possession, and assault, but had somehow managed to avoid serious prison time and significant consequences, suggesting he had powerful connections and protection within the criminal justice system itself. We might have corruption, Chen said quietly, the realization hitting her like a physical blow to the chest. Her voice was low and troubled, the implications clear to everyone who heard her. If Delgado has avoided prosecution and serious jail time despite multiple arrests and clear evidence of criminal activity, someone in law enforcement might be protecting him. Someone with authority and influence. Someone with access to the system and the ability to make evidence disappear or witnesses recant their testimony. The implication hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the entire investigation. Internal affairs would need to be brought in to investigate potential corruption within the police department itself. The investigation would need to expand to include a comprehensive corruption probe. The scope of the criminal enterprise was growing larger and more complex with each passing hour. The web of connections spreading to include not just criminals, but potentially law enforcement officials as well. Officer Johnson sat in a safe house across town with Rex, watching the news coverage of the investigation with a complicated mixture of pride and anxiety. His discovery, his and Rex's discovery, had sparked something massive and far-reaching, something that was now consuming the attention of multiple law enforcement agencies and federal authorities. But he also understood the danger he and his family now faced. The organization behind this operation wouldn't take kindly to interference from a patrol officer and his dog. They would view him as a threat, as someone who had disrupted their operations and exposed their network to law enforcement scrutiny. As night fell over the city, casting long shadows across the buildings and streets, Detective Chen stood at the window of the federal building, looking out at the lights below, at the city that was unaware of the criminal conspiracy operating within its boundaries. Somewhere out there, the criminal organization was realizing that their operation had been compromised. Somewhere out there, they were making decisions about how to respond to the threat posed by the investigation. Somewhere out there, a professional operative named Viktor Petrov was likely receiving new orders from his superiors. Orders that might involve eliminating evidence, eliminating witnesses, or eliminating threats to the organization's continued operation. The investigation had uncovered the tip of an iceberg, revealing just the smallest portion of a much larger criminal enterprise. But the true scope of what lay beneath the surface remained hidden, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be exposed. The organization's full extent, its connections, its resources, its reach, all of it remained a mystery, waiting to be unraveled through patient investigation and careful analysis. And as the night deepened, as the task force prepared for the next phase of the investigation, as warrants were being finalized and tactical teams were being assembled, no one could predict what would happen next or how the organization would respond to the escalating threat that was closing in around them from all sides. The game had changed, the stakes had been raised dramatically, and the real battle, the confrontation that would determine the outcome of this investigation, was about to begin. The warrant had been signed by Judge Patricia Morrison at 11:47 p.m., authorizing a full search and seizure operation at the warehouse location identified as a probable distribution and manufacturing center for the criminal organization. The document, printed on official court letterhead and bearing the judge's signature and seal, represented the legal foundation for what would be one of the largest coordinated law enforcement operations the city had seen in years. By midnight, the tactical teams were assembling at a staging area 2 blocks away from the target location, checking equipment, reviewing the operational plan, and preparing themselves mentally for what lay ahead. FBI Tactical Team Leader Captain James Sullivan stood before his assembled team, a group of highly trained agents in dark tactical gear, body armor, and helmets equipped with night vision capabilities. Each agent carried specialized equipment, breaching tools, communication devices, flashbangs, and non-lethal restraint systems. Sullivan was a veteran of over 200 tactical operations, a man whose calm demeanor and decisive leadership had saved countless lives during high-risk situations. "Listen up," Sullivan said, his voice clear and commanding, carrying across the assembled group. "We're going in at 1 a.m. Intelligence suggests there are approximately 15 to 20 individuals inside the warehouse at any given time. We expect resistance. We expect they're armed. We expect they'll try to destroy evidence when they realize we're coming. Our job is to secure the perimeter, neutralize any threats, and preserve evidence. Rules of engagement are clear. We use force only when necessary to protect ourselves or others. We announce ourselves before breaching. We give them opportunities to surrender. But if they choose to fight, we respond with overwhelming force. Questions?" There were no questions. These were professionals, men and women who had trained extensively for exactly this kind of operation. They understood the risks, they understood the stakes, and they were prepared to do their jobs with precision and professionalism. Detective Chen was present at the staging area, coordinating with the federal agents and reviewing the intelligence one final time. Satellite imagery showed the warehouse was a large rectangular structure with multiple entrances and exits. A complex layout that would require careful planning to ensure all escape routes were covered. Thermal imaging suggested significant heat signatures inside the building, consistent with industrial equipment or large-scale drug manufacturing operations. "We've got DEA agents positioned on all 4 sides of the building." Chen briefed the assembled law enforcement personnel. "ATF is standing by in case we encounter weapons caches. Local police will handle the perimeter and traffic control. Once we're inside and have secured the location, forensic teams will move in to document and collect evidence. Everyone clear on their assignments? The assembled officers and agents confirmed their understanding. The operation was as coordinated and organized as months of planning could make it. Every contingency had been considered. Every potential problem had been anticipated and planned for. At 12:45 a.m., the teams moved into position. They moved silently through the dark streets, their equipment making minimal noise, their movements precise and practiced. Agents took positions at each corner of the warehouse, establishing a perimeter that would prevent anyone from escaping. Specialized teams moved into position at each entrance, preparing breaching equipment and readying themselves for the assault. Inside the warehouse, the criminal operation continued unaware of the danger closing in around them. Large industrial equipment dominated the interior space: chemical processing tanks, heating elements, ventilation systems, and packaging machinery. The smell of chemicals was overwhelming, a pungent mixture of acetone, ephedrine, and other precursor chemicals used in drug manufacturing. Workers in protective equipment moved between stations, carefully measuring and mixing chemicals, monitoring reactions, and packaging the finished product into kilos and smaller quantities for distribution. Marcus Delgado stood in an office overlooking the warehouse floor, reviewing inventory sheets and financial reports. He was a man in his early 50s, with gray streaking his dark hair, his face bearing the marks of a life spent in the criminal underworld. He had survived wars between rival criminal organizations, had navigated the treacherous politics of organized crime, and had managed to accumulate significant wealth and power. But tonight, despite his experience and his connections, he had no idea that his operation was about to be destroyed. "How much product do we have ready for shipment?" he asked Viktor Petrov, who stood beside him in the office. Petrov was dressed in dark clothing, a 9mm pistol visible in a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. His face was cold and expressionless, the face of a man who had seen too much violence and felt too little emotion. 300 kilos of processed cocaine, ready for distribution," Petrov replied in accented English, his Russian heritage evident in his speech patterns. 200 kilos of heroin in various stages of processing, and another 100 kilos of synthetic drugs, methamphetamine, MDMA, and other products. The operation is highly profitable. The network is expanding. But there are concerns about the police discovery at the train station. We need to determine how much they know and whether we need to activate contingency protocols. Before Delgado could respond, the night erupted into controlled chaos. Flashbangs exploded through windows, their brilliant light and deafening noise designed to disorient and incapacitate. Tactical teams breached the entrances simultaneously, their weapons raised, their voices shouting commands. "Federal agents, hands up! Get on the ground! This is a raid!" The workers inside the warehouse, most of them low-level employees with minimal criminal history, immediately dropped their tools and raised their hands, offering no resistance. They understood the futility of fighting against armed federal agents. But in the office overlooking the floor, Marcus Delgado and Viktor Petrov reacted with the decisiveness of men experienced in violence and conflict. Petrov drew his weapon, a fluid motion born from years of training and practice. "We need to leave," he said coldly to Delgado. "Now, there's a back exit through the chemical storage area. We can be gone before they secure the building." But escape was not to be. Captain Sullivan's team had anticipated this possibility and had positioned agents at every exit, including the back route through the chemical storage area. As Petrov and Delgado moved toward the exit, they encountered armed Federals, agents blocking their path. "Drop your weapon," Sullivan commanded, his own weapon raised and aimed directly at Petrov. "Drop it now, or we will open fire," For a moment, the situation hung in perfect balance. Petrov's hand tightened on his weapon, his mind calculating odds and possibilities. He was a professional, trained in combat and violence, but he was also intelligent enough to recognize an unwinnable situation. Slowly, with deliberate movements, he lowered his weapon and placed it on the ground. "On the ground, now!" Sullivan shouted, and both men complied, dropping to the floor with their hands behind their heads. Within seconds, they were handcuffed and restrained, their freedom taken away in an instant. The operation proceeded with textbook efficiency. Tactical teams moved through the warehouse, securing the location and verifying that all threats had been neutralized. DA agents began the process of documenting the drug manufacturing operation, photographing equipment, taking samples of chemicals and finished products, and collecting evidence that would prove invaluable in prosecution. Forensic specialists moved through the warehouse with methodical precision, collecting fingerprints, DNA samples, and any other evidence that might connect individuals to the operation. They documented the manufacturing process, the equipment used, the chemicals present, and the scale of the operation. What they found was staggering: a sophisticated, large-scale drug manufacturing and distribution operation capable of producing hundreds of kilos of various narcotics per month. Detective Chen stood in the center of the warehouse, watching the operation unfold, feeling the weight of success mixed with the understanding that this was just one piece of a much larger criminal enterprise. The warehouse was secured, the drugs were seized, the key players were in custody. But the organization that had created this operation, the network that extended beyond this single location, remained partially hidden. "We've got financial records," called out one of the forensic specialists, holding up a computer hard drive and several filing cabinets. "Looks like they kept detailed records of transactions, shipments, and payments. This should give us a complete picture of their distribution network." As the night wore on and the operation continued, the full extent of what had been discovered began to emerge. The warehouse contained not just drug manufacturing equipment, but also weapons, dozens of firearms, ammunition, and explosives. It contained records of payments to corrupt officials, documentation of bribes and payoffs, evidence of systematic corruption within the criminal justice system itself. By the time the sun began to rise over the city, casting long shadows across the warehouse and illuminating the scale of the operation that had been shut down, Detective Chen had the information she needed to expand the investigation even further. The network extended deeper and wider than anyone had initially suspected. It involved not just criminals, but potentially government officials, law enforcement officers, and business leaders. It was a conspiracy of significant scope and complexity. Marcus Delgado sat in an interrogation room at police headquarters, his hands cuffed to the table, his expression grim and resigned. He had been through this before, had faced arrest and interrogation multiple times in his criminal career. But he understood that this time was different. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The operation had been completely compromised. "I want a lawyer," he said flatly when Detective Chen entered the room. "I'm not saying anything until I have legal representation." Chen nodded, expecting this response. "That's your right, Mr. Delgado. But I want you to understand what we've found. We've found your manufacturing operation. We've found 300 kilos of cocaine, 200 kilos of heroin, and 100 kilos of synthetic drugs. We've found weapons and explosives. We've found financial records documenting payments to corrupt officials. And we've found evidence connecting you to multiple violent crimes." She placed a folder on the table, filled with photographs and documents. "We've also found evidence of Protocol 7, your contingency plan for when operations are compromised. That plan includes eliminating witnesses, destroying evidence, and eliminating threats to the organization. That's conspiracy to commit murder. That's racketeering. That's organized crime. You're looking at decades in federal prison, Mr. Delgado. Decades. Delgado's face remained impassive, but Chen could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, considering whether to cooperate or maintain his silence. But before he could respond, the interrogation room door opened and a lawyer entered. An expensive lawyer. The kind retained by major criminal organizations for situations exactly like this. My client will not be answering any questions without my presence and guidance, the lawyer said firmly, and I'm advising him to remain silent until we've had time to discuss his options and potential plea agreements. Chen left the interrogation room, understanding that Delgado would not be providing information voluntarily. But that was okay. The evidence they had collected was substantial. The warehouse operation had been completely documented. The financial records would provide a roadmap of the entire distribution network. And Viktor Petrov, the professional operative, might prove to be more cooperative than Delgado, especially if he faced charges that could result in life imprisonment. As the investigation continued to expand and deepen, as more arrests were made and more evidence was collected, the true scope of the criminal enterprise began to emerge. It was bigger than anyone had initially imagined. It extended into multiple cities, multiple states, potentially multiple countries. It involved not just drug trafficking, but weapons smuggling, money laundering, corruption, and violence. It was a conspiracy of significant scope and complexity, and bringing it down would require months or even years of investigation, prosecution, and legal proceedings. But for now, the immediate victory was clear. A major drug manufacturing and distribution operation had been shut down. Hundreds of kilos of narcotics had been seized. Key members of the criminal organization had been arrested. And the investigation was providing information that would help law enforcement understand and dismantle the larger network that supported and sustained this operation. Officer Johnson watched the news coverage of the warehouse raid from his safe house, seeing footage of the tactical teams breaching the building, of agents securing the location, of the massive quantities of drugs being removed and cataloged. He felt a sense of satisfaction and vindication. His discovery, his and Rex's discovery, had led to all of this. It had sparked an investigation that had exposed a major criminal conspiracy. But he also understood that the danger was far from over. The organization had been wounded, but not destroyed. There were still members at large. There was still a network operating. And those responsible for the conspiracy would likely seek revenge against those who had brought them down. The investigation was far from finished. The interrogation of Viktor Petrov took place in a secure federal facility, a nondescript building in an undisclosed location designed specifically for handling high-risk criminal cases and sensitive investigations. The room was small and austere, with concrete walls painted a neutral gray, a metal table bolted to the floor, and 2 chairs on opposite sides. A mirror on one wall allowed observers to watch the proceedings from an adjacent room. Petrov sat motionless, his hands resting on the table, his expression completely unreadable. The face of a man trained to reveal nothing, regardless of circumstances or pressure. Federal prosecutor Sarah Mitchell sat across from him, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp features and penetrating eyes that had seen countless criminals attempt to manipulate and deceive the justice system. She had prosecuted some of the most dangerous organized crime figures in the country, and she understood the psychology of men like Petrov. Men who had been trained to endure interrogation, who had been conditioned to resist pressure, who understood that cooperation often meant betrayal of their organization and associates. "Mr. Petrov," Mitchell began, her voice calm and measured, "you're facing federal charges for drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence against you is substantial. We found your fingerprints on equipment in the warehouse. We found your DNA at the scene. We have surveillance footage of you at the location. We have financial records showing payments to you from the organization. The case against you is overwhelming." Petrov said nothing, his eyes remaining fixed on a point on the wall behind Mitchell, his expression unchanged. "However," Mitchell continued, "we're prepared to offer you a deal. If you cooperate with us, if you provide information about the organization, its operations, its members, and its leadership, we can recommend a reduced sentence to the judge. You could potentially spend 15 to 20 years in prison instead of life imprisonment. That's a significant difference, Mr. Petrov. That's the difference between dying in prison and potentially seeing freedom again." For the first time, Petrov's eyes moved, shifting to look directly at Mitchell. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, his Russian accent pronounced. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen. "The organization I work for is not like other criminal enterprises. It is not a gang or a cartel. It is a network that extends into government, into law enforcement, into the judiciary itself. If I cooperate with you, if I provide information, I will be marked for death. My family will be marked for death. There is no witness protection program that can protect me from this organization. There is no safe place on this earth where they cannot find me." Mitchell leaned forward slightly. "That's exactly why we need your cooperation. That's exactly why you need to help us. We need to understand the full scope of this conspiracy, the names of the officials involved, the extent of the corruption. Only then can we dismantle this organization completely and protect everyone involved, including you and your family." Petrov was silent for a long moment, his mind clearly working through the calculations and consequences. Finally, he spoke again. "I need guarantees," he said. "Real guarantees, not promises that can be broken. I need my family moved to a secure location. I need a new identity. I need to know that if I provide information, I will not be executed by this organization." "We can arrange all of that," Mitchell said. "But first, we need to know what we're dealing with. We need names. We need specifics. We need to understand the full extent of the corruption." Over the next several hours, Petrov began to talk. Slowly at first, carefully measuring each word, but gradually becoming more forthcoming as he realized that cooperation might be his only path to survival. What he revealed was shocking in its scope and its implications. The organization, which Petrov referred to simply as the network, was not a traditional criminal enterprise. It was a sophisticated conspiracy involving high-level government officials, federal judges, senior law enforcement officers, and business leaders. The primary purpose was not just drug trafficking or weapons smuggling. Those were profitable, but secondary operations. The primary purpose was influence and control. The network used its criminal enterprises to generate massive amounts of cash, which was then used to bribe officials, to fund political campaigns, to influence policy decisions, and to ensure that its members remained protected from prosecution. The leadership, Petrov explained, is at the highest levels of government. I don't know all the names. I'm just an operative, a tool used to carry out operations. But I know that there are federal judges involved. I know that there are senior law enforcement officials involved. I know that there are members of Congress involved. The corruption extends to the very top of the government. Detective Chen, who was observing the interrogation from the adjacent room, felt her stomach tighten as she listened to Petrov's revelations. If what he was saying was true, then the investigation would need to expand far beyond what anyone had anticipated. It would require federal oversight, special prosecutors, possibly even the involvement of the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General. How many law enforcement officials are involved? Mitchell asked, her voice remaining calm despite the gravity of the information. I know of at least 12 federal agents, 4 state police officers, and 6 local police officers, Petrov said. But there may be more. The corruption is systematic. It's built into the organization. Officers are recruited, they're offered money, they're offered protection, and they become part of the network. Those who refuse to cooperate are transferred, demoted, or forced out of the department. Do you have names? Mitchell pressed. Petrov hesitated, and for a moment, Chen thought he might refuse to continue. But then he nodded slowly. I have names, he said. But once I provide these names, once I betray these people, my life is over. Even if I'm protected, even if I'm given a new identity, I will never be safe. The organization has a long memory. The organization has resources that extend across the entire world. We understand the risks, Mitchell said. But we also understand that you're the only person who can help us stop this. You're the only person with direct knowledge of the operations and the people involved. Without your cooperation, this organization will continue to operate, will continue to corrupt officials, will continue to traffic drugs and weapons, will continue to destroy lives. Petrov closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was a look of resignation and acceptance in his gaze. He had made his decision. The first name is Special Agent David Morrison, Petrov said quietly. He works for the FBI. He's been taking bribes from the organization for at least 5 years. He's the one who warned us when law enforcement was getting close to our operations. He's the one who provided information about ongoing investigations. He's the one who ensured that certain cases were dropped or that evidence mysteriously disappeared. The name hit Chen like a physical blow. Special Agent David Morrison was a senior FBI official with over 20 years of experience. He had a stellar reputation within the Bureau. He had worked on some of the most significant organized crime cases in the country. And he was apparently a corrupt operative working for the criminal organization they were investigating. Over the next several hours, Petrov provided a list of names. Federal agents, state police officers, local police officers, and government officials who were allegedly involved in the corruption. Each name represented a betrayal, a violation of the public trust, a corruption of the justice system itself. As the interrogation continued, law enforcement officials were working frantically to verify the information Petrov was providing. Background checks were being conducted. Financial records were being examined. Phone records and email communications were being analyzed. And with each piece of information verified, the scope of the corruption became more apparent and more disturbing. Back at police headquarters, Detective Chen was called into the office of Police Commissioner Robert Hayes, a man in his 60s who had spent his entire career in law enforcement and had recently been appointed to lead the city's police department. Hayes looked troubled, his face bearing the stress of what he had just learned. "We have a serious problem," Hayes said without preamble. 3 of our officers have been identified as potentially corrupt. Officers James Mitchell, David Torres, and Patricia Sullivan. All 3 are senior detectives with significant authority and access to sensitive investigations. If they've been compromised, then we need to review every case they've worked on, every investigation they've been involved with. We need to determine what cases might have been sabotaged, what evidence might have been destroyed, what convictions might have been wrongfully obtained or improperly dismissed. Chen sat down heavily, the implications overwhelming. The investigation had started with a simple discovery at a train station and had evolved into an exposé of systematic corruption within law enforcement itself. It was the kind of scandal that could destroy careers, that could undermine public trust in the entire justice system, that could result in the overturning of dozens or even hundreds of convictions. "What do you want me to do?" Chen asked. "I want you to lead an internal investigation," Hayes said. "I want you to look into the cases handled by these 3 officers. I want you to identify any potential corruption or misconduct. And I want you to do it carefully and quietly. We don't want to tip off anyone who might be involved in this conspiracy. We don't want evidence being destroyed or witnesses being intimidated." Over the next several days, Chen assembled a small team of officers she trusted completely. Officers with spotless records and no connections to the suspects. They began the painstaking process of reviewing cases, examining evidence, interviewing witnesses, and looking for patterns of corruption or misconduct. What they found was deeply disturbing. Officer James Mitchell had worked on 17 cases over the past 5 years, and in at least 12 of those cases, key evidence had gone missing or witnesses had recanted their testimony under suspicious circumstances. Officer David Torres had handled major drug trafficking cases, and in several of those cases, known dealers had been arrested but then released on technicalities or had had charges dropped due to missing evidence. Officer Patricia Sullivan had worked on corruption cases, and in several of those cases, investigations had mysteriously stalled or had been closed without proper resolution. The pattern was unmistakable. These officers had been systematically undermining investigations, protecting criminals, and ensuring that members of the criminal organization remained free from prosecution. They had betrayed their oaths, betrayed their colleagues, and betrayed the public trust. As the evidence mounted, arrest warrants were prepared. Federal prosecutors worked with the Department of Justice to ensure that the cases would be handled at the federal level, ensuring impartiality and preventing any potential local interference. By the end of the week, the 3 officers were arrested at their homes, their weapons confiscated, their badges revoked, their careers in law enforcement permanently ended. But the corruption didn't stop with the 3 officers. As the investigation expanded, as more evidence was collected and analyzed, additional officers and officials were identified as being involved in the conspiracy. The scope of the corruption was far larger than anyone had initially suspected. It extended into multiple agencies, multiple jurisdictions, and multiple levels of government. Federal Judge Marcus Richardson was arrested for accepting bribes in exchange for dismissing cases or providing information about ongoing investigations. State Police Captain William Harrison was arrested for providing protection to criminal organization members and for leaking information about law enforcement operations. City Councilman Thomas Bradley was arrested for accepting bribes in exchange for ensuring that zoning laws and building permits were approved for properties used by the criminal organization. Each arrest represented a crack in the foundation of the criminal enterprise, each revelation exposing more of the corruption that had been hidden beneath the surface of legitimate government and law enforcement operations. The investigation had transformed from a simple drug trafficking case into a comprehensive exposé of systematic corruption and organized crime at the highest levels of government. Officer Johnson, watching the news coverage from his safe house, felt a complex mixture of emotions. His discovery had led to all of this. The warehouse raid, the arrests, the exposures of corruption. He had been the catalyst for bringing down a criminal conspiracy that had infected the very institutions that were supposed to protect the public. But he also understood that this victory came with a price. The corruption that had been exposed would shake public confidence in law enforcement. It would raise questions about the integrity of the justice system. It would require years of reform and rebuilding to restore trust in institutions that had been compromised. Detective Chen stood in the federal building, watching as more and more evidence was collected, more and more names were added to the list of suspects. More and more pieces of the conspiracy were exposed to the light of day. The investigation had become something far larger than she had ever imagined when she first arrived at the train station to examine a backpack. It had become a reckoning with corruption at the highest levels of government and law enforcement. But as the investigation continued, as more arrests were made and more evidence was collected, a new concern emerged. The criminal organization, wounded but not yet destroyed, was still operational. There were still members at large. There were still operations continuing in other cities, other states, potentially other countries, and those responsible for the conspiracy would likely seek revenge against those who had brought them down. The investigation was far from finished, and the danger was far from over.